We're talking scissors today, going over a lot more than just sharpening. Likely a full restoration. Why? Because after 3 years of looking, thinking that in the move to this shop, I had just misplaced my favorite, most useful pair of shears. I found them. You wanna know where? Dad's toolbox. I mean, there isn't a doubt in my mind that he was completely clueless that he even had these in the toolbox, because he knew I've been looking for them. I mean, they are just perfect for wrapping up tools and stuff like that when I ship stuff out, which is my main use for them. These are actually, I think they call them dressmaker shears. You can tell that because of the way the handles are. They're designed to be sitting flat on the ground, and you kind of push through when you cut stuff, which is great for cutting up rolled paper. Yeah, I know all y'all out there never cut cloth scissors with, never cut paper with cloth scissors, but they're my scissors. That's what I'm using them for. And I know that he didn't know that they were there, because his idea of shop organization was he would just take his shirt, he would put all the tools in the shirt, walk over and just dump them on the top of his toolbox, which is where I found these. And time has not been kind to them. They need a complete workup. So, hey, might be a good time to talk about scissors and specifically sharpening them, because they're one of the more unique tools out there, and you don't sharpen them like anything else. Now, there are a lot of kind of halfway tricks you can use to sharpen stuff. One of them with scissors is if you take something really hard, like a honing rod or even a Coke bottle, which is where I learned this trick, you can actually take the set of scissors, hold it perpendicular, and just kind of go through the scissors like that. And that will get a dull set of scissors sharp for a little bit. That is a hack. And what I've actually done is I've actually made this much harder to sharpen in the future. And I will explain that why in the future. But that does get your scissors sharp enough to cut for a bit. Now, if I had, like a pair of $2 scissors, like these ones I have had been using until I had found these, and they were dull, and I just needed them sharp enough until I could go buy another $2 set of scissors, yeah, that would be the way I would sharpen it, just to get me by, because these are kind of disposable. But if you have a nice pair of Lifetime scissors, I would not do that to it. And speaking of Lifetime, be sure and stick around to the bonus at the end. This one's going to be a bit different, but it is about one of the most influential people in this DIY creator community. Now, to sharpen scissors, you do not need to take them all the way apart. But because I'm going to be cleaning the rust and stuff off of that, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Now, most scissors come with either some kind of a screw drive, a bolt drive, or something like that, something that you can unscrew, or they have a rivet. And the rivet ones are a lot more complicated to take apart, because you have to basically re-rivet it. So that's why I always look for ones that I can disassemble fairly easily. Now, something that most people don't realize is scissors do not cut. They are not a slicing tool for the most part. They are what they call a shearing tool. Now, when we cut something like with a knife or a chisel, we're basically taking an edge that is super fine enough that we can push it through two cells, so to speak, and just slice things apart. That's why the angle we create these things is very, very fine, narrow, or whatever. It's very steep, so to speak, because we want to get it in between the cells so we can make the cut. But shearing is different. Now, you might have seen videos of like steel getting stamped. That's a shear cutting action. You have a piece of steel right here, and then you have the break or whatever they call that down below, one below, and then they have one above it, and they are somewhat lined up right next to each other. And then this piece gets pressed down until the steel actually breaks along that path as that moves down, so you end up with two different cuts of steel. It's actually pressing it against the other one until its shear strength fails and it breaks along that line of pressure. This is also something you might see in snow. You know, the snow banks, whenever avalanches start, it's like the whole bank just kind of moves down a little bit and then gravity takes over. It's that sheer strength of the snow got overcome, so it broke away and then tumbled down the mountain. Well, that's what's happening. It's also why you don't get a perfectly smooth cut when you're doing a shear cut, because it's kind of broken. It's not like a chisel where it's just perfectly sliced, so it's nice and smooth. But if you're doing a shear cut on paper, the thickness of paper, you would never really tell if it's rough. And that's kind of why the edges of scissors are shaped the way they are. My knife has a very fine edge. My scissors, that edge, the knife edges are practically almost parallel. They're so thin. But a scissors edge, you have one flat here and the other flat is way over. Now, why isn't it dead at 90 degrees? Well, it's because of what we are cutting. And those angles will change for different things, but for the most part, if you have a factory edge, just get it close. And what happens is, say we have a piece of paper, you know, paper's kind of flimsy and stuff like that. If you were to just have two flat pieces come down and press it and kind of break it off right there, the paper might tend to kind of flop around, because what if the back of the side hits this side and starts lifting it up, okay? It's because the paper is flimsy, why we have a slight angle. Because a slight angle, one edge here, and then the other edge up here, focuses all the force right here. It doesn't distribute the force across this way. So that is why a scissors angle is so steep, is because it's trying to focus the shear force so that you can overcome the shear strength of whatever you're cutting. Let's get this cleaned up. So with those cleaned up, let's take a closer look at these scissors, comparing them to what I had to use until I found these, and see how they work. Now, a modern pair of scissors, like we all use all the time, well, they have some features that date back to what these vintage style ones, which these are not expensive ones. It's a Weiss number 20. You can pick them up on eBay for like 10 bucks, probably garage sales for $2 or $3. That's how I got these right here. You know, the really nice ones from the early 1900s, all handmade. There are a few companies that are still making them in England, but you know, you can find really nice scissors for fairly close to what you're buying new ones, and these work a lot better, longer, with less tuning once you get them tuned up. These, again, they're pretty much disposable. But I want you to notice a few things. You know, when we sharpen a chisel or a knife or something like that, we polish the edges. That is not something you want to do on the scissors. Notice, you can see the machine marks right here. That'll work perfectly fine on both sides. The reason why is if you've ever gotten two perfectly smooth, flat pieces of materials on top of each other, there's a lot of stiction involved. And that stiction is actually not something you want in a pair of scissors, because not only will it make it harder to actually move the scissors themselves, but you actually want some flex in the scissors. And that flex you can see whenever you close a pair of scissors, because there will be light coming through them towards the back section. Can we see that? Now, with these modern scissors, they aren't very much, and that is why they tend not to work as well over time. But if you get a professional set of scissors, you can actually see that gap in between them. In fact, I can put the ruler right in there. So with it closed, it is touching in the point But as you open it up, that curvature kind of guarantees that it's going to be touching as the scissors come all the way back. That's why a lot of times if you don't have it adjusted perfectly, scissors might not cut as well here, even though you had the most power to exert that shear force because of leverage with the fulcrum point being right there. That's why it's easier to cut closer together when there's enough kind of curvature spring so that these two forces are engaged. If it isn't there, then that force is actually going side by side and not right on top of each other to shear that item. I say that so that I want you to see how much of a curvature these blades have. Can you see that? It is really not flat at all. The longer the scissors, the more it's going to be curved around the edge right here. A lot of times, the old-timey scissors would also, instead of curving it, they would induce a twist into their blades so that they would twist into each other, and that actually made it a lot more accurate, but it's also much harder to produce. With the curvature, you can actually have the scissors touching on both edges as it goes down to kind of line everything up. With a twist, it just has to be tuned perfectly. Another thing I want you to notice is see how the previous sharpeners, you see a little polish on this edge and a little bit over here. That's because this is actually dished in the middle. It is concave. It was ground on a wheel, and that is on purpose. One reason why these are kind of hard to resharpen over time, because these are just stamped out, and that is pretty much dead flat. So in order to put an edge right on the cutting side, you actually have to remove all this material, because if you remove the material kind of just on that edge a little bit, well then whenever they scissor together, that force is actually away from the contact point. You can't have any bevel here. That has to be flat where that shearing edge is. Having it concave guarantees that when you sharpen this interior section, you're guaranteed that this is going to be flat. You're not going to be rounding it over as much. So that's actually the first thing I'm going to do to sharpen this. I point all that out because it dictates what tools you're going to use to sharpen with. I know a lot of people that sharpen their scissors on the same stones they sharpen their chisels and knives on. You know, something that's nice and flat and long. The problem is, and might be purely theoretical, but if you have a curved blade like that, and you're starting to sharpen it all the way on a nice flat things, what's going to happen? You're going to be removing more metal on the two edges. Even if you press it down and force it flat against the stone, there's just more pressure on the ends. And that will affect how that blade will work long term. You sharpen it 5-6 times and all of a sudden this edge, instead of being a very uniform curvature that's going to slide very easily, you start to get something that looks more like a violin bow where it's flared on the end. Which is why when I sharpen, I really do like these little paddles. They come from DMT, the manufacturer DMT. I'll put a link down below, but a lot of different manufacturers make stuff like this, and you don't have to use this style. You can actually use a mill file to sharpen scissors, and the reason why is for the same kind of benefits. If I were to put that stone, it's touching all the way across, I have a chance of putting more pressure here. But if I'm looking at the paddle, look at how much it's engaging. I can still put it and keep it flat this way and that way because it is hollow stone, and it will keep it in plane as I go across, but it's not going to be putting more pressure on any one portion of the edge, so I can pretty much guarantee that I'm going to maintain the factory curvature. And that is the same with the mill file, which this one's been damaged with copper. But if you're working the mill file, just work it straight across. Don't work it this way, work it across that way. So real quickly, I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to sharpen this interior edge. Now, I will say this, the interior is probably the least important of the edges you're going to be sharpening. So if you're doing a normal tune-up on your chisels, I probably wouldn't even touch this. Notice I'm trying to keep my pressure in the middle of the curvature as much as I possibly can. And also notice it's only shining up the two edges. Now I am going to work through the grits from blue to green to red. It gets finer. I will only do this on the interior. On the exterior bevel, I just leave it on the rough one. And I'm actually not sure that this has any benefit at all. It's just, you know, I'm a woodworker. I do stupid stuff sometimes. Now, once again, if you take a good close-up look at what I've done right there, you can see the reflection. There are still little lines and stuff on the cutting portion of the edge. Here's a cutting edge, and there's a cutting edge. It is not perfect to the level of a chisel, but these aren't chisels. They are not slicing, they are shearing. I'm just trying to get that edge nice and flat so that the force it exerts on whatever it's going to shear in half is a very precise together and lined up with the other edge. So now onto the other side, you can see this bevel right here and how steep it is. I always say this looks like it's been sharpened many, many times, so it's kind of rounded a little bit. That's perfectly fine. So I'm going to hold it straight up, and I'm just going to get a consistent angle, try to find it best I can. The only thing is I don't want it 90 degrees. I want to lift up this side a little bit, and then I'm just going to run down. Be sure not to cut yourself. Now, to get my perfect angle, I can see that little bit of a shine right there. Can you see that? I want that shine to be for the full length. So right now I'm a little bit too steep, so I'll just lift up a little bit more until I get it all the way across. That's kind of how I ease into the edges with my turning tools. As long as I start it out not quite at 90, I know I'll be okay for a pair of scissors. Now there are other people out there that get very precise angles, and you can do this on a grinder or something like that, but for what I'm doing, this is perfectly good enough. Now if you feel on the back side, there is a burr, kind of like a chisel. It's very rough because I'm doing a very rough coarse edge, but we want that burr when we are sharpening, because the very first cut I do with this, I don't quite have a burr right there, so I'm going to go back and work on this a little bit more, is going to remove that burr itself. We're actually going to use a shear force to take away that burr, basically shear the scissors so that they are lined up perfectly. Now, did you catch that? I created a burr on both of these, and the first cut is going to remove that burr ever so slightly so it's perfectly lined up. But the thing is, I have two angles that created that burr. Remember earlier when we did the Coke bottle or the burnisher trick where we just kind of pressed it together? Well, what we were doing is just like on a card scraper. That is actually folding the metal over to create that burr, and then the first time I go like this, it removes a burr, thus giving me a better edge. The problem is we folded the metal over with pressure, thus flattening that. Even the slightest of angle that it had, it flattened it out. You can get away with that once, maybe twice, but after that you can't fold a burr anymore, and even sharpening it with something like this, it's going to take way too long to get back down to where you can get a burr. So pretty much you have to go to the grinder to get that, and most people aren't going to do that. They're just going to go buy another $2 pair of scissors, which is why if you have a nice pair of scissors, you don't do that one. The simplest way to sharpen them is But before we do that, let me reassemble this because I'm done sharpening here. We just got to put it back together. So here are the parts. We have 2 washers, one stacked on top of each other. We have this nut, and if you will notice, it has 2 flats on the end, but they don't go all the way flat. It kind of comes halfway up. So that tells me that this part goes in the round hole, perfectly fits. Come back over, and then we want to line up the square with this side. That's what keeps it from spinning on us. Then we can drop our 2 washers on. I am looking at the wear patterns. I'm assuming it goes kind of like that. Not 100% sure, but it'll work. And then we screw that on. Now the tension of this bolt is incredibly important to how your scissors are going to work. Because if you don't get it tight enough, basically the scissors aren't going to engage until they are way up here. Which, you know, this being the first time these are closed, it's kind of grippy because it's kind of taking away that burr. But right now, they aren't really touching until towards the end. So I have to go a lot tighter on this. So here we go. Okay, come back over, and we want it to be a little bit loose when it's fully opened, but once those 2 edges start engaging, right there is where we want it to be engaged, because this is where you have your most power, because your leverage is back here, there's a fulcrum, so if you have to cut something fairly thick, that's where you're going to get your most shear power, because remember, you're pressing both ends to cause it to break in the middle. Right now, scissors are engaging right about there, so it's still a little bit tighter. Make it too tight, and the scissors are difficult to work. I will say I don't really have the right screwdriver for this. It's not going all the way across. I probably should go get a bolt, but I'm going to continue this way. Okay, there we go. It's starting to engage right about there. Good enough. So let's see how they work. Will they cut with just their own weight? Pretty much. Easy peasy. Cuts all the way to the tip, right? Yep. Starts here easy. Paper doesn't want, if I put the paper at an angle, does it still cut? Yep. So that's sharp enough. Those are good. Now, if I was just doing normal maintenance sharpening, I would basically open these up as wide as I can, and then I would just sit here and do this edge right here. I wouldn't really worried about this as long as it didn't have any schmutz or anything on it, and that will get you a perfectly working edge. You'll kind of push the burr over, but you won't flatten that angle, and then that first cut will take away the burr, and you can get back to work. So it would take, you know, a minute, maybe. So there we go. I now have something I can put back in my shipping department. So every time I pack up a box or something like that and I have to put in wrapping paper, well, I won't be wasting time wondering where my good scissors are. I know now. Well, I hope you all picked up a few tips, tricks along the way. More importantly, you understand the difference of why scissors are kind of unique and that you have to sharpen them a little bit differently than just about any other tool in your woodworking arsenal, because they aren't cutting, they're shearing. Y'all be safe, have fun, and remember, it's always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others, even though all I did this time is get my tool back. For today's bonus, I'd like to talk about probably one of the most influential individuals in the how-to movement we know today, and probably somebody you've never heard of, Russell Morash, or Russ. Starting with the French chef and Julia Childs, he created the programs that introduced this nation and everyone around the world to the idea of the how-to movement. I know personally, in my 20s, there was like this hour-and-a-half block every Sunday on PBS that was just must-see for me. The Victory Garden, This Old House, New Yankee Workshop. I mean, he introduced us to people like Norm Abrams, Tom Silla, Bob Vila, Kevin O'Connor, that whole crew out there, and of course Julia Childs, with whom he worked with for over 30 years. And that's not including all the people that were in all the spin-offs that came from those shows. In 2014, the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences awarded him a Lifetime Achievement Award. And if you consider all the people today who used him as the inspiration to start their careers as content creators, man, that is well deserved. Russell Morash passed a few weeks ago. Down in the comments below, I put links to 2 videos uploaded by those that knew him in real life, who worked with him to discuss all his accomplishments. So go take a look, maybe pour one out and give a cosmic thanks to one of those individuals you might not have known about, but who kind of changed our culture in the DIY community. All of us content creators out there today owe him a thanks, because he created the foundation of what we do today.